The kitchen smelled of roasting turkey and brown butter, a smell that had filled this house every Thanksgiving for as long as I could remember, and for the past 3 years it had been my job to make sure it still did. I stood at the counter, running a thumb along the edge of a carving knife that didn't need sharpening, checking the clock on the stove for the 4th time in 20 minutes. The bird had another hour. The potatoes were in the pot, cold water waiting for the boil. The cranberry sauce sat in its dish, the ridges from the can still visible because Nora liked it that way, and I had learned not to argue with small preferences that made her smile. The house was quiet in that particular way a house gets when it's holding its breath before company. Eleanor had arrived an hour ago, letting herself in with the key I'd given her after the funeral, and I could hear her in the dining room now, the soft clink of silverware as she set the table. She hummed while she worked, something I'd noticed about her early on and never mentioned. It was a habit her daughter had shared. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and let my gaze travel across the kitchen, everything in its place. I'd learned to keep it that way. When grief first settled into this house, I'd let things slide, dishes piling up, mail unopened, Nora's homework unsigned. It was the order that pulled me back. The simple, undeniable fact that a man could still make a meal, still fold laundry, still show up for a child even when half of him felt like it had been buried alongside his wife. I'd built a life around that fact, and it held. My eyes caught on something tucked under the ceramic turkey on the windowsill, a folded piece of paper, the kind Nora tore from her school notebook, with the ragged edge still attached. I pulled it free and opened it. The handwriting was Nora's, careful and round, with the kind of effort a 9-year-old puts into something that matters. "Dear Miss Whitfield," it said, "please come to Thanksgiving dinner at our house." I asked my dad and he said yes. "We are having turkey and pie. I really want you to come. Love, Nora Crane." I went through it twice. The first time I registered the words. The second time I registered the lie. My thumb pressed into the crease of the paper. Claire Whitfield. Nora's first-grade teacher. The one who had sent home a note after the first parent-teacher conference that said Nora is a joy to have in class in handwriting that looked like it belonged on a wedding invitation. I remembered her from drop-offs and pickups, from the winter concert where Nora had forgotten her line, and Claire had knelt beside her and whispered it into her ear. I remembered her, but I hadn't thought about her in years, not since Nora moved on to 2nd grade, not since I'd stopped standing at the school doors, making small talk with other parents I didn't know how to be friends with. The doorbell rang. I folded the note and slid it into my pocket. My hand stayed there a moment longer than it needed to. I heard Eleanor's footsteps cross the hall, heard the front door open with its particular creak, the one I'd been meaning to oil for 2 winters now. Then Eleanor's voice, warm and unsurprised. "Claire, how lovely. Come in out of the cold." I stepped into the hallway. The entryway was a narrow space with a coat rack I'd built myself and a runner rug in deep blue that Eleanor had picked out. And there, in the doorway, with the November light behind her turning the edges of her hair to something like copper, stood Claire Whitfield. She was holding a bottle of wine in both hands, the way someone holds something they're not sure the recipient actually wants. Her coat was a deep green wool, and her cheeks were pink from the wind. She looked exactly like I remembered her, and also nothing like I remembered her. The difference was that I was looking. "Daniel," she said, and her voice was the same, warm, a little uncertain. "I hope I'm not intruding," Nora said. She trailed off, and I watched her expression shift as she registered something in my face. "She did tell you, didn't she?" I opened my mouth, closed it. I could feel Eleanor's eyes on me, and I knew without looking that she was already putting pieces together, already seeing something I hadn't even named myself. "She told me," I said, and it wasn't exactly the truth, but it wasn't exactly a lie either. The note was in my pocket. The invitation had been issued. I was just the last to know about it. Claire's shoulders dropped a fraction of an inch. "Oh, good. I've been standing on your porch for about 30 seconds trying to decide if I should just hand you the wine and make a run for it." Something in my chest loosened. I hadn't expected her to be funny. Eleanor reached for the wine, her silver hair catching the hall light. "You'll do no such thing." Nora would be heartbroken. She took Claire's coat next, and I watched her hands move with the kind of ease that came from decades of making people feel welcome. "Daniel, why don't you get Claire something warm to drink? I believe there's cider in the stove." I hadn't put cider on the stove, but I nodded, because Eleanor's suggestion was less a question and more a piece of stage direction, and I'd learned to trust her instincts about what a room needed. "Dad!" Nora's voice came from the living room before her body did. She rounded the corner at a run, her socks sliding on the hardwood, and threw herself at Claire with the kind of full-body enthusiasm that 9-year-olds still had, and adults had learned to suppress. Claire caught her, and for a moment I watched my daughter's face press into the shoulder of a woman who wasn't her mother. watched her arms wrapped tight around someone she'd chosen for herself. "You came," Nora said, her voice muffled against Claire's sweater. "Of course I came. You invited me." Claire pulled back, her hands on Nora's shoulders, her eyes, those expressive eyes I'd noticed even in a school hallway 3 years ago, scanning my daughter's face. "You look taller. That's not allowed. I'm almost 10. Almost 10 is still 9. I checked." Nora grinned. I watched the exchange from the edge of the hallway, my hand still in my pocket, my thumb still on the folded note. There was something about the way Claire spoke to Nora, something easy and unforced, that made me feel like I was watching a door open that I hadn't known was closed. Eleanor caught my eye from across the entryway. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. Her expression held the kind of knowing that made me want to look away, and also made me want to stay right where I was. "Cider," I said, because it was the only word I could find that didn't feel too large for the moment. "I'll get the cider." I turned toward the kitchen, and as I went, I heard Claire's voice behind me, asking Nora something about school, and Nora's answer, and the sound of Eleanor's shoes on the floor as she moved toward the dining room. The house had shifted. The air felt different, fuller, like a room that had just had its windows opened after a long, still winter. I stood at the stove and poured cider into a mug I'd made myself, the clay still slightly rough under my fingers. Through the kitchen window, I could see the last of the morning frost melting off the back fence. I heard Claire at something Nora said, a sound that traveled through the house and settled somewhere I couldn't name. My wife had laughed like that. Not the same sound, but the same way, the same ease. I hadn't let myself think about that in a long time. I wasn't sure I wanted to start now, but the note was in my pocket. The invitation had been issued, and Claire Whitfield was in my house, on Thanksgiving Day, with her green coat on the hook by the door, and her wine on the counter, and her presence filling a space I hadn't known was empty. I carried the cider back to the hallway. Claire took the mug from me, her fingers brushing mine for half a second, and I felt it, a small, quiet jolt, the kind you don't name because naming it makes it real. I didn't name it. I just stood there and let her thank me, and watched her take a sip of something warm while my daughter tugged at her sleeve, already pulling her toward the living room to show her something, anything, everything. Eleanor was in the dining room doorway now, and I caught her eye again. She smiled, a small, private smile, and then turned back to the table, to the plates and the silverware and the napkins folded just so. I watched her go, and I thought about how long it had been since this house had held more than 3 people at its table, and I wondered what else Nora had set in motion with a folded piece of notebook paper and a sentence that wasn't quite true. Then I went back to the kitchen, to the turkey and the potatoes and the cranberry sauce with its can ridges still showing, and I let the routine carry me forward while something new, something I hadn't asked for and hadn't expected, settled into the quiet spaces of my house. Claire took the potato masher from Nora's hand with an exaggerated look of concern. "You're holding it like a hammer." "It works," Nora said. "It works if you want lumpy potatoes, which, I should add, some people do." She glanced at me and I realized I was supposed to have an opinion on this. "I don't have strong feelings about potato texture," I said, a diplomatic answer. Claire repositioned Nora's grip, her fingers over my daughter's, and demonstrated a slower pressing motion. "Like this. You're not punishing the potatoes, you're persuading them." Nora tried the motion, then tried it again, and the masher sank through the boiled chunks with a soft, giving sound. Steam rose between them. Claire had rolled her sleeves to the elbow, and a dusting of flour from the counter had settled on her forearm. She didn't seem to notice. I noticed. I turned back to the turkey, basting for what had to be the 4th time, and let their voices fill the kitchen behind me. Nora was telling Claire about the science unit on simple machines, how the potato masher was technically a liver, and Claire was asking if she'd demonstrated this to her father yet. The question was for Nora, but the glance that came with it skimmed across my back. I felt it like a hand on a doorframe, light and brief. The kitchen had changed. The same copper pots hung from the rack above the island. The same window over the sink showed the same bare maple branches against a gray November sky. But the room felt fuller now, its familiar edges pushed outward by something I couldn't name. I had spent 3 years in this kitchen moving from task to task with the quiet efficiency of a man who needed to keep his hands busy. Tonight, for the first time since I could remember, I was not alone in the work. "You made this?" Claire's voice, closer than I expected. She was holding the wooden spoon I'd set out with the rest of the utensils, turning it over in her palm. I'd carved it 2 winters ago, during a stretch of weeks when the workshop was the only place I could breathe. Black walnut, sanded to a finish so smooth it felt almost soft. I did. "The grain is beautiful." She ran her thumb along the curve of the bowl, following the dark lines that swept through the wood like currents in slow water. "Walnut?" I nodded. Most of what I make is walnut or cherry, sometimes maple if the piece calls for something lighter. And what decides that? What the piece calls for? The question was more than I'd expected. Most people asked about the tools or the time it took, the surface-level things. Claire was asking about the wood itself, about the thinking that happened before the first cut. I felt the pull to answer fully, to tell her about the way a board could speak if you listened long enough, about grain and tension and the quiet conversation between the maker and the material. But that was a door I wasn't sure I wanted to open. Not yet. It depends on the project, I said, and then, because the deflection felt too obvious, I added, what about you? What's your favorite part of teaching? She didn't push. She set the spoon back on the counter, and something in the way she did it told me she'd noticed the pivot and accepted it. The moment when a kid realizes they can sound out the words on their own, not because I told them they could, but because they just did it, and the words were there, and it worked. Their whole face changes. Like the potato masher, I said. She laughed, a short, surprised sound. Exactly like the potato masher. Nora had moved on to the cranberry sauce, which she was stirring with a concentration that bordered on religious. Claire, do you want to see my room after dinner? I have the rock collection from the field trip. The one from the creek bed? You remember that? Of course I remember. You found a piece of quartz and told me it was a diamond, and I had to pretend to be very impressed. It looked like a diamond, Nora said, and her voice carried that particular mix of dignity and defense that only a 9-year-old could manage. I turned away to hide the smile. It was a small thing, a reflex, but I felt it in my face like a muscle I'd forgotten I had. Eleanor appeared in the kitchen doorway just as the timer for the rolls went off. She had been in the dining room, setting the table with the good plates, the ones with the blue rim that my wife had loved. I'd seen her through the doorway earlier, her silver hair catching the light as she folded napkins into precise triangles, and I'd felt the usual mixture of gratitude and something sharper. She had been here for every holiday since the funeral. She knew this house as well as I did, knew its silences and its habits, and she had never once pushed me to fill them differently. But she was pushing now, not with words. With her presence in the doorway, with the way she watched Claire and Nora at the stove, and then looked at me, her expression so mild it was almost neutral. Almost. The rolls, I said. I'll get them. She moved past me to the oven, and as she did, her hand brushed my arm. Just a touch, the back of her fingers against my sleeve. It could have been accidental. It wasn't. The dining room glowed when we all sat down. Candles on the table, the ones Eleanor had brought last year and I'd never lit until tonight. The turkey, golden and steaming, on a platter that had belonged to my grandmother. The potatoes, which Nora had mashed under Claire's supervision, and which were, as promised, entirely smooth. The cranberry sauce, still bearing the faint ridges of the can because Nora had insisted on unmolding it herself, and the result was, as she put it, rustic. Claire sat across from me. Nora sat beside her. Eleanor took the end of the table, and for a moment before anyone spoke, I looked at the four of us and felt the arrangement of bodies in the room like a sentence I hadn't written. "This is the best turkey I've ever had," Nora announced, before she'd taken a single bite. "You haven't tried it yet," I said. "I can tell by looking." Claire cut into her slice and held it up. "She's right. This is a visually exceptional turkey." "Visually exceptional," I repeated. "Is that a teaching term?" "It's a Claire term. I use it for things that are too good to be merely good." I didn't know what to do with that, so I passed her the gravy. The meal moved slowly, not the slow of awkward silences, but the slow of people who had nowhere else to be. Nora told the story of the field trip to the creek bed in full detail, including the part where a boy named Marcus had slipped on a rock and fallen in, and had to ride the bus home in his spare clothes. Claire told us about the current first-grade class, about a girl who had drawn a picture of a dragon with 6 heads, and labeled each one with a different emotion. Eleanor listened, mostly, her hands folded on the table, her wine glass untouched. I ate, I listened. I watched Claire's hands move as she talked, the way she used her fork to punctuate a point, the way she leaned toward Nora when Nora spoke, as if whatever my daughter was saying was the most important thing in the room. And I felt something shift in my chest, not a loosening, not a release, just a small, quiet adjustment, like a cabinet door that had been stuck for years and had finally, without any particular effort, swung open. After dinner, Nora cleared the plates with the urgency of a child who had an agenda. "Board game," she said. "We have to. It's Thanksgiving." "Is that a rule?" Claire asked. "It's my rule." She had already retrieved the game from the hall closet, a battered box of Scrabble with a missing letter Q that we'd replaced with a slip of paper years ago. Nora set it up on the coffee table in the living room, and Claire and I took our places on opposite ends of the sofa. Eleanor settled into the armchair by the window, a book open on her lap that I knew she wasn't reading. Nora drew her tiles with the intensity of a poker player. Claire drew hers with a small, private smile that made me wonder what she'd pulled. I drew mine and found a rack full of consonants. "Zephyr," Claire said, laying down her first word. Z on a double-letter score. That's not a real word, Nora said. It's a real word. It means a gentle breeze. You're making that up. I'm a teacher. I don't make things up. I just know things that no one else has bothered to learn. Nora looked at me for adjudication. I shrugged. She used a Z. That's either a power move or a bluff, and either way, I respect it. Claire's eyes met mine over the board. There was something in them, a flicker of amusement that was also, I thought, a kind of question. Are you having fun? Are you allowed to have fun? I didn't know how to answer it, so I looked back at my tiles and found a word. Quiet, I said, and laid it down. Q on a triple letter, Nora said, and then, because she was my daughter, that's a lot of points for a word that means not talking. Your father is a man of hidden depths, Claire said. I laughed. It came out before I could stop it, a real laugh, the kind that started low and surprised you with its volume. Nora looked up, and I saw her register the sound, saw her file it away somewhere in that sharp 9-year-old mind. Claire didn't look up, but her mouth curved, and she kept arranging her tiles. From the armchair, Eleanor turned a page. I didn't look at her. I didn't need to. I could feel her satisfaction from across the room, a quiet, steady warmth, like a radiator in an old house. The game went on. Nora won, partly through luck and partly through a strategic willingness to invent words and defend them with such conviction that Claire and I both let her get away with it. By the time the last tile was laid, the living room windows had gone dark, and the candles on the mantel had burned down to stubs. Nora yawned, a full-body yawn that started in her shoulders and ended in her toes. I'm not tired, she said. You're horizontal, I pointed out. She had slid off the sofa at some point and was now lying on the rug, her head propped on a throw pillow. That's just comfortable. Claire stood and began gathering the tiles. I should probably head out soon. Let you all have your evening. Nora sat up fast. You're leaving? It's getting late, sweetheart. Nora looked at me, and then at Claire, and then she did something I hadn't expected. She stood, walked over to Claire, and wrapped her arms around her waist. It wasn't a quick hug, the kind children gave out of politeness. It was a full, leaning-in hug, the kind Nora used to give her mother at bedtime, the kind that said, I want to stay here. Claire's arms came around her, and for a moment the two of them stood in the middle of my living room, and I watched my daughter press her face into the shoulder of a woman who had been her teacher, who was now something else. Something I didn't have a word for yet. I felt a pang, sharp and unlocatable. Not jealousy, not grief exactly. Something closer to recognition, the sense of seeing a shape I knew but hadn't seen in a long time. I looked away, at the Scrabble board, at the scattered tiles, at the word quiet still on the board. Thank you for having me, Claire said over Nora's head. Her voice was slightly muffled, slightly thick. Thank you for coming. I meant it. I hadn't meant it when she'd arrived. I meant it now. Nora pulled back, her face flushed with sleepiness and satisfaction. Can Claire come back tomorrow? Nora, I said. It's a reasonable question, Claire said. I'm a reasonable person. We'll see, I said, and Nora, too tired to argue, accepted this with a nod and shuffled toward the stairs. Eleanor rose from the armchair. I'll get her to bed. She kissed Nora's forehead as she passed, and then she looked at me, and her expression was the same one she'd worn in the kitchen doorway. Knowing, patient, a little sad, a little hopeful. Take your time, once, it said, and it was, I understood, not about the dishes. Then they were gone, Nora's footsteps on the stairs, Eleanor's steady tread behind her, and Claire and I were alone in the living room, with the dying candles and the scattered tiles, and the quiet that settled around us like something that had been waiting. I could make tea, I said. Claire looked at me. The candlelight caught the side of her face, the curve of her cheek, the small lines at the corner of her mouth that appeared when she smiled. She wasn't smiling now, but she was close to it. Tea would be nice. I walked to the kitchen, and she followed, and I filled the kettle and set it on the stove while she leaned against the counter, the same counter where she'd stood hours earlier with flour on her arm and a potato masher in her hand. The kitchen was different now, darker, quieter, but it still held the warmth of the evening, the residue of laughter and voices, and the particular hum of a house that had been full. The kettle began to heat. I didn't know what I was doing, not really. I knew I wasn't ready to let her leave. I knew I wanted to hear her voice in my kitchen for a little while longer. And I knew, with a certainty that surprised me, that I was standing on the edge of something I hadn't planned for, something that had arrived on my doorstep with a covered dish and a warm smile and an invitation I hadn't written. I reached for the mugs, and I waited for the water to boil. The back porch was a different place after dark. By day it was a stretch of weathered boards and potted herbs, a spot where Nora did her homework when the weather held. By night it became something else entirely, a ledge suspended over the black lawn, with only the old maple to mark the boundary between house and sky. Its branches were bare now, November stripped, and they made a geometry against the stars that I had memorized years ago without meaning to. Claire sat at the far end of the bench, her hands tucked into the pockets of her coat. She had been quiet since Eleanor left, quieter still after I checked on Nora and found her breathing slow beneath her quilt, one arm flung across the pillow where her mother used to sleep. The house had settled into its nighttime hum, the refrigerator cycling on, the baseboard heaters ticking as they cooled. And out here, in the cold, neither of us had moved to fill the silence. I didn't know what the silence was asking. I only knew it was different from the one we'd shared the night before, waiting for the kettle to boil. That had been a comfortable quiet, two people who had spent a day together and didn't need to fill every pause. This one had weight. It pressed against my ribs like a question I hadn't learned to answer. "She's something, your daughter," Claire said finally. Her voice was low, and she didn't turn to face me. She was looking out at the lawn, at the place where the grass disappeared into shadow. "She is." The way she handled today, all those people in her space, and she just opened the door wider. Claire paused. "That's not something every 9-year-old knows how to do." I followed her gaze into the dark. "She's had practice." "With what?" "With people in her space." I stopped. The words had come out before I'd measured them, and I felt the cold air on my teeth. After the funeral, there were months where the house was never empty. Neighbors, friends from the school, Eleanor. Everyone wanted to bring a casserole and sit in the living room and tell me what a wonderful woman I'd married. Nora was 6. She learned to be gracious before she learned to tie her shoes. Claire turned her head then. I felt the movement more than I saw it, a shift in the air beside me. That must have been hard. It was what it was. Daniel. The way she said my name stopped me. It wasn't a correction exactly. It was an invitation, a door held open. I looked down at my hands. They were resting on my knees, and in the dim light from the kitchen window I could see the calluses on my palms, the small scar on my thumb from a chisel that had slipped 2 winters ago. I had been making a spoon then, a long-handled stirring spoon from a piece of cherry wood, and I remembered standing at the sink with my hand wrapped in a dish towel, watching the blood bloom through the fabric and thinking that I should have been more careful, that I should have been paying attention. "I don't talk about it," I said, "not to anyone. Eleanor knows, but she doesn't push. And Nora..." I stopped again. "Nora needs me to be steady. That's the job. That's the only job." "Is it?" I didn't answer right away. The maple branches moved in a gust of wind, a dry scraping sound, and somewhere down the street a dog barked twice and then went quiet. "Some nights," I said, "after she's in bed, I stand in the hallway outside her door and I listen to her breathe, and I think about all the ways I'm not enough. Not patient enough, not warm enough, not whatever it is she lost when she lost her mother. I can make her breakfast. I can help her with her math homework. I can't be what's missing." The words hung in the cold air. I hadn't planned to say them. I hadn't known I was going to say anything at all, and now they were out, and I couldn't call them back, and Claire was sitting beside me with her hands in her pockets and her face turned toward mine. "You're not what's missing," she said. "You're what's here. That's different." "It doesn't feel different." "I know," she said it simply, without ornament. 2 syllables, and they landed with a certainty that made me look up. "How do you know?" I asked. Claire was quiet for a long moment. The kitchen light caught the side of her face, and I could see the fine lines at the corners of her eyes, the way her mouth had settled into something that wasn't quite a smile. She was looking at me now, and I had the sense that she was deciding something, weighing a door of her own. "There was someone," she said. "For a long time. 5 years." I waited. "He was a good man, kind. He got along with my family. He remembered my birthday. He showed up." She paused. "But he wouldn't commit. Not to marriage, not to a future, not to anything that had a name." And I kept telling myself it was fine, that I didn't need the paperwork, that what we had was enough, until I realized it wasn't. What happened? I left, or he let me leave. It amounts to the same thing. She pulled her hands from her pockets and pressed them flat against her thighs, a small, deliberate movement. I told myself I was done, that I wasn't going to put my heart into something that could just dissolve, and for 2 years that worked. I was careful, I was sensible, I was very good at being alone. I heard the past tense in her voice. "Was. And now?" I asked. She looked at me and her expression was unreadable in the half-light, but I thought I saw something flicker there, something that might have been fear or hope or both at once. "Now I'm sitting on a porch in November with a man I didn't expect to meet, wondering if this is real or if it's just the holiday talking." The wind picked up again. It came through the maple branches with a sound like paper tearing, and I felt the cold seep through my shirt, into the places where warmth had been. I should have brought a heavier coat. I should have thought to offer her one. I should have done a dozen small things, and I hadn't done any of them, and Claire was still looking at me with that steady, waiting gaze. "I don't know what this is," I said. "I don't know what I'm doing. I haven't known what I was doing since you walked through my front door." "That's honest. It's the only thing I've got right now." She nodded, a small movement, and I saw her shoulders drop a fraction, the way they might if she'd been holding something and had finally set it down. "I'm afraid," she said. "That's mine. I'm afraid that I'm just a warm body at the right time, a temporary comfort, and that in a week or a month you'll realize you don't actually want this, want me." The word temporary landed in my chest and stayed there. I knew that word. I had lived inside it for 3 years, in a house where every object was a marker of something that had ended, where every photograph was a reminder that the person in it wasn't coming back. I knew what it was to be a placeholder, a man going through the motions of a life that had already stopped. "You're not temporary," I said. She didn't respond. She was watching me, and I could see that she wanted to believe me and that she wasn't sure she could. "I don't know how to do this," I said. "I don't know how to open a door I've kept closed for 3 years. I don't know if I'm allowed to want something for myself, something that isn't just getting through the day. But I know that when you're in the room, I don't feel like I'm getting through the day. I feel like I'm in it, like I'm actually here." Claire's hand moved. It was a small thing, barely a gesture, but I saw her fingers uncurl from where they'd been pressed against her leg, saw them reach toward the space between us and then stop, as if she'd thought better of it. "I see you," she said quietly. "I see the grief, Daniel. I see the way you hold everything together because you think if you let go for 1 second it'll all come apart. And I'm not asking you to let go. I'm just asking you to let someone stand next to you while you hold it." The cold was in my bones now. My fingers were stiff, and my breath came in small white clouds, and I didn't care about any of it. I cared about the woman on the bench beside me, and the way she had spoken my name, and the fact that for the first time in 3 years I had told another adult the truth about what lived inside me, and she hadn't flinched. "I should make hot chocolate," I said. Claire blinked. "What? Hot chocolate? You're freezing! I'm freezing! We've been sitting out here for half an hour, and I haven't offered you anything." I stood, and my knees protested, stiff from the cold. "It's not much, but it's what I've got." She looked up at me, and her expression shifted into something I couldn't quite place. "Daniel, yeah, that's not a no." I stopped. My hand was on the doorframe, and the kitchen light was spilling out onto the porch, and Claire was still sitting on the bench with her coat pulled tight around her, and her eyes on my face. "What is it?" "It's a yes," she said, "to the hot chocolate, and to the rest of it, to standing next to you." I didn't say anything. I couldn't. The words I wanted weren't there, or they were there and I didn't know how to reach them. So I just held the door open, and I waited for her to rise, and when she did I saw that her hand was still extended toward the space where mine had been, as if she had been reaching for something and had forgotten to pull back. The kitchen was warm. The kettle was on the stove, and the mugs were in the cabinet, and the night was still cold and dark beyond the windows. But Claire was inside now, and I was inside, and the bench beneath the maple stood empty, its wood holding the faint impression of 2 bodies that had sat there and spoken truths they hadn't planned to tell. The morning light came through the kitchen windows in long, pale bands, the way it always did in late November, thin and a little apologetic. I stood at the counter with a mug of coffee I hadn't tasted and listened to the silence of the house. Nora was still asleep upstairs. Eleanor had left for her guest room the night before, and the kitchen held only the faint scent of yesterday's turkey and the quiet hum of the refrigerator. I set the mug down. The house felt different, not wrong exactly, but emptied in a way I hadn't noticed before Claire had filled it. The air lacked something I couldn't name, and I stood there in my own kitchen like a man who had walked into the wrong house and was too polite to leave. My hand rested on the counter. The wood was cool under my palm. I had made this countertop myself, 3 years ago, in the months after the funeral when I needed to keep my hands busy and my mind blank. I had sanded it to a smoothness that still surprised me, and I had thought at the time that if I could just build enough things, if I could just keep the house in order and Nora fed and the bills paid, I would eventually feel like I was living instead of simply not dying. I had been wrong about that. I knew it now, standing in the November light with the coffee going cold in my hand. I had been wrong, and I had known I was wrong for a long time, but knowing a thing and doing something about it were 2 different muscles, and I had let the second one atrophy. Footsteps on the stairs, small, quick, the way Nora moved when she was still half asleep and wanted to find me before the day started. She appeared in the kitchen doorway in her flannel pajamas, her hair a dark tangle, and she looked at me with an expression that was too perceptive for 9 years old. "You're standing in the same spot you were in when I went to bed," she said. I moved a little. Where? I pointed to the coffee mug. I made that. She considered this and found it insufficient. She climbed onto the stool at the kitchen island and pulled the box of cereal toward her, but she didn't open it. She just sat there with her small hands on the cardboard and watched me. When is Miss Whitfield coming back? The question landed in the quiet kitchen like a stone dropped into still water. I felt it in my chest, a sharp, specific pressure, and I did not have an answer for her. I did not have an answer for myself. I don't know, I said. Did you ask her? No. Why not? I looked at my daughter, at her serious face and her unbrushed hair, and the way she was holding the cereal box like it was a book she was about to open. I thought about the bench beneath the maple tree, and the way Claire's hand had stayed extended toward the space where mine had been. I thought about the hot chocolate we had made together, and the silence that had followed it, a silence I had not known how to fill. I think I made a mistake, I said. Nora's eyes widened, but not with surprise. With recognition, the way a child looks when an adult finally says something the child has known all along. Are you going to fix it? I picked up my coffee and drank it, cold and bitter, and I set the mug in the sink. Yes, good, she said, and she opened the cereal box. I left her with Eleanor, who had come downstairs in her quiet way and was already pouring orange juice and asking Nora about her dreams. Eleanor looked at me as I pulled on my coat, and her expression was the same one she had worn all through Thanksgiving dinner, patient and knowing and entirely unsurprised. I'll be back, I said. Take your time, she said, and the way she said it told me she understood exactly where I was going and why. The drive to Beacon took 20 minutes. The roads were clear, the sky a pale November gray, and the trees along the highway had lost most of their leaves. I drove with both hands on the wheel and my mind turning over the same 3 sentences like a stone I kept polishing. I don't want you to leave. I don't know how to do this. I don't want to be alone anymore. I had never said any of those things out loud. Not to Eleanor, not to Nora, not to myself in the dark hours of the morning when sleep wouldn't come. I had built a life out of not saying them, and the life had held together, but it had not been a life anyone else could enter. It had been a room with the door closed, and I had been standing inside it for 3 years, waiting for something I could not name. Claire's apartment was on the 2nd floor of a brick building on a quiet street, the kind of building that had old radiators and tall windows and a front door that stuck in the winter. I parked across the street and sat in the truck for a long moment, with the engine off and the cold seeping through the windows. I could see her window from where I sat, the curtain half drawn, a lamp burning inside. I got out of the truck. The air was sharp and clean, and my breath showed in small clouds as I crossed the street. I climbed the stairs to her door and stood there with my hand raised and my heart beating hard enough that I could feel it in my throat. I knocked. 3 raps, the kind a man makes when he is not sure he will be welcomed. The door opened, and Claire stood in the frame in a sweater the color of autumn leaves, her hair pulled back, her face shifting from surprise to something more complicated. Behind her, in the small living room, I could see a suitcase open on the couch, clothes folded in neat stacks, a book on the armrest, the signs of someone preparing to leave. Daniel, she said, and her voice was careful, the way a person's voice is when they are not sure what to expect from you. You're packing. I'm going to visit my family for a few days. I told Nora I'd be back for the school play. She paused. I thought it might be good to get some distance. The word distance sat between us like a third person. I understood what she meant. I had given her no reason to stay. I had stood in my kitchen the night before and let the silence grow until it filled the whole house, and I had not said the one thing I should have said. I came to apologize, I said, for last night, for the way I pulled back. She didn't move from the doorway. She didn't invite me in. But she didn't close the door either, and I took that as something. You don't have to apologize, she said. I understand that this is complicated. I'm Nora's former teacher. I showed up at your house without an invitation from you. I didn't expect... She stopped, and I watched her search for the right word. I didn't expect anything. That's not true, I said. You expected me to be honest with you, and I wasn't. Her expression flickered, something moving behind her eyes that she didn't let reach her mouth. She crossed her arms, not in anger, but in the way a person does when they are bracing for something. What do you want to say now? I stood on her doorstep in the November cold, and I looked at this woman who had sat beside me on a bench and told me the truth about her own heartbreak, who had made hot chocolate in my kitchen and laughed at Nora's Scrabble words, who had looked at me across the Thanksgiving table like I was a person worth seeing. And I said the thing I had not been able to say for 3 years. I'm afraid, I said. I've been afraid since my wife died. I'm afraid that if I let someone in, I'll lose them. I'm afraid that if I let myself feel something again, it will be taken from me the way everything else was taken, and I know that's not rational. I know it doesn't make sense, but it's the truth, and I should have told you last night instead of standing in the kitchen like a man who had forgotten how to speak." Claire's arms stayed crossed, but her hands had loosened. Her fingers were no longer gripping her sleeves. She was just holding herself now, and her eyes had gone bright in a way she was trying to control. "I was hurt," she said. "When you pulled away, I thought I had misread everything. I thought you were trying to let me down gently. I wasn't. Then what were you doing?" "I was trying to protect myself, and I was doing it badly, and I was hurting you in the process, and I didn't know how to stop." She exhaled, a long breath that she had been holding since I knocked on her door. She stepped back, and for a moment I thought she was going to close the door, but instead she opened it wider. "Come inside," she said. "It's cold." I stepped into her apartment. It was small and warm, with books on every surface and a quilt folded over the back of the couch, and the smell of something clean and faintly floral. The suitcase was still open, but she didn't look at it. She sat down on the edge of the couch, and I sat in the chair across from her, and between us was a coffee table with a mug on it and a stack of graded papers and the ordinary evidence of a life I had not been part of until now. "I've been alone for 2 years," she said, "by choice. After my last relationship ended, I decided I wasn't going to try again unless I was sure, unless it was real." She looked at me. "I'm not good at casual. I'm not good at temporary. And when you pulled away last night, I thought you were telling me that this was temporary. It's not. You don't know that." "I know I don't want it to be." She looked down at her hands. I watched her turn her thumb over the back of her other hand, a small, absent gesture, the kind a person makes when they are thinking about something too large for words. "I don't know how to do this either," she said. "I don't know how to be with someone who is still carrying grief the way you are. I don't know if I'm strong enough for that." "You don't have to be strong for me. You just have to be here." She looked up. Her eyes were the same eyes that had looked at me across the porch in the cold November dark, and they held the same question they had held then. "Can I trust you with this?" "What are you asking me for?" she said. "I'm asking you to stay, not forever, not right now, but stay long enough to see if this is something real. Come to Nora's play. Come to dinner next week. Let me try again. Let me be better at this than I was last night." A tear slipped down her cheek, and she wiped it away with the back of her hand, and she did not look away from me. "I was so sure you didn't want me here," she said. "I wanted you here. I just didn't know how to say it." She stood up. I stood up. The space between us was small, and neither of us moved to close it. And then she took a step forward, and I took a step forward, and we met in the middle of her living room like two people who had been walking toward each other for a long time without knowing it. She reached up and put her hand on my cheek. Her palm was warm, and her fingers were light, and she touched my face the way a person touches something they are afraid of breaking. "I'm not going to disappear on you," I said. "I'm not going to pull away again. I'm going to be here, and I'm going to be honest, and I'm going to let myself feel whatever this is, even if it scares me." "It scares me too," she said. "I know." She kissed me. It was not a kiss like the ones in movies, the kind that sweep in with music and certainty. It was a kiss that happened slowly, her mouth finding mine with a gentleness that felt like a question. I put my hand on the back of her neck, and her hair was soft under my fingers, and I felt her exhale against my lips. The kiss lasted a long moment, and when it ended, she did not pull away. She just rested her forehead against mine, and we stood there in her small living room with the suitcase open on the couch, and the lamp burning, and the whole world waiting outside the door. "Nora's play is Thursday," she said, her voice quiet and close. "I know. I'll be there." I pulled back just enough to look at her face. Her eyes were still bright, but she was smiling now, a small smile that was more in her cheeks than in her mouth. "And after that," I said, "after that we'll figure it out. Slowly, one step at a time. Slowly," I said. "I can do slowly." She laughed, a short, quiet sound that was half relief and half something else. She dropped her hand from my face and took my hand instead, and her fingers laced through mine like they had been doing it for years. "You should go home," she said. "Nora's going to wonder where you are." "Nora's the one who told me to come." Claire looked at me, and I watched her understand what I was telling her, that my daughter had seen what I could not see, that a 9-year-old had extended an invitation I had been too afraid to extend myself, that the whole thing from the beginning had been Nora's doing, and I was only now catching up. "She's a remarkable kid," Claire said. "She is." I kissed her again, just once, just a brief press of my lips to hers, and then I let go of her hand and walked to the door. She followed me and stood in the doorway as I stepped into the hall, and the cold air rushed in and wrapped around both of us. "Thursday," she said. "Thursday." I walked down the stairs and out to the truck, and when I looked back, she was still standing in the doorway with her arms wrapped around herself, and her hair catching the light from inside. She raised her hand, a small wave, and I raised mine, and then I got in the truck and started the engine and drove home through the bare November trees with the feeling of her hand still on my cheek and the sound of her voice still in my ears. The house was warm when I walked in. Nora was at the kitchen table with a coloring book, and Eleanor was at the stove making soup, and the whole place smelled like onions and broth and something that had been there all along, but I had only just learned to notice. Nora looked up when I came in, and she didn't ask me where I had been. She just looked at my face, and whatever she saw there made her smile. "Good," she said, and she went back to her coloring. Eleanor handed me a spoon and a bowl and said nothing at all, but her eyes held the same quiet blessing they had held all weekend, and I understood that she had been waiting for this moment for 3 years and that she had never once doubted it would come. I used to think being a father meant holding everything together so no one else had to feel the weight of it, that if I just kept the house in order and the meals on the table and the bills paid, I was doing the job. I learned this weekend that the job was never about holding it all by myself. It was about letting one person, the right person, see what I was holding and stand next to me while I held it. I learned something else too. My 9-year-old saw what I could not see for 3 years. She knew what the house was missing before I did. She knew what I needed before I had the words for it. She wrote a letter on notebook paper and folded it small and tucked it under a ceramic turkey on the windowsill. And she changed our whole life on a Thursday in November.
I keep thinking about how often a child watches us with eyes that see further ahead than our own. If this story stayed with you, consider subscribing to the channel and leaving a comment with what it brought up for you. I publish a new story every few days. And if you want to read more like this, my novels are on Amazon under the name Isabelle Cross. Until next time, love, Isabelle.